Let's list the top 10 things that will increase the value that a company will get upon an exit. High contract values.
It's not just that it's a high contract value, but that it's appropriate.
I think for me, recurring revenue, route density, average age of the account.
So I want to look at their year over year growth numbers. In fact, I want to look at their growth from the previous probably 2 or 3 years.
And longevity in the market. How many techs are you going to get with your deal?
The best way to build a pest control company to sell is to build it, not to sell. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Bug Bucks podcast. I'm Alan Draper. As always, I've got Eric Bassett here with me. What's going on, Eric?
Hey, Alan, not too much. I am recording from Washington State this week, and mostly rainy. The sun's out today, though, so that's nice. But yeah, lots of rain, and for us, it actually means lots of ant activity, so happy about that.
Love that. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
We've got Chase Goodeill back for part 2.
Yes.
And I think we're going to get into some really cool stuff about acquisitions. And I've been hearing about a lot of acquisitions recently. And I don't know if it's just people are starting to listen a little more to the podcast or whatever, but I'm hearing about at least one a week. Just heard about one today. So we're going to get into that a little bit. As a refresher, Chase Goodeill is the president of Goodeill Holdings and the owner of Pest Control Consultants. And he's been on the show a bunch before. You guys know him. Welcome back, Chase. How you doing, man?
I'm doing excellent, guys. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to diving back into this acquisition stuff.
Awesome. We were kind of chatting pre-record button about some of the benefits of acquisitions, and you were kind of going a little bit all over the place, putting the deal together. And I'm trying to remember what we covered in part 1, so we don't do too much overlap or redundancy there. But let's talk about, is there a way that, excuse me, is there a way that we can do like a timeline of what a deal looks like, an acquisition looks like, and what are kind of the big milestones in that process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alan. And I think we talked a lot last week's show about, how do you know what companies are for sale? How do you find deals? And I shared, you have to know your competitors. What are they doing? Are they a commercial book? Are they a residential book? What accounts do they have? If you're a salesperson like me and you're an aggressive guy, you know exactly, who's using what service in your markets. If there's a large hospital, if there's a large list of McDonald's accounts, whatever it might be, if you don't have the account and you're an aggressive business owner trying to kind of expand in the space, you should know who has the account. And a lot of times that's what leads to me knowing, what accounts my competitors have, and ultimately if they're going to sell their business, what I would be acquiring. So I think starting by, knowing your competition in your market and your space is huge in terms of, smaller acquisitions with some competitors.
So that's a really good first step. Like, hey, who are these people, especially in the finding phase, which we talked about in part 1 of this episode, I guess you can call it. So let's assume, Chase, that we're now to the point where we've identified something, and maybe there's some interest in, a buy-sell situation. What's next? What type of information should the buyer be requesting? What is that process like? Walk us through that until we get to the part, let's even get to the part where we're talking about financing the deal.
Yeah, I mean, you want to get to a point where you can see their tax returns, where they can put together an active customer list. Some of these baby boomers that aren't using the most up-to-date CRMs, they may not have the cleanest list of accounts like a millennial might have that's real organized using a CRM. So if you're not using a CRM like Field Routes, you should be, because it's going to come in handy in terms of someone else potentially buying your business. I start with a financial report. I start with a tax return. I start with active customers. I like to see revenue broken down by month, so I can predict how many employees I'm going to need to generate that revenue. Those kind of things. I also like to find out if the owner is looking to kind of sail off into the sunset, or is he looking to stay on, for a year, 2 years, kind of transition us into the post-acquisition stuff. And some of that's a big deal. For me, I like to just write the check and see the owner off and take the accounts and start kind of, transitioning them into our database and the way we do things. That way, there's no conflict there with the previous owner. And a lot of times
I think that the seller is also going to prefer that in a lot of cases, right? And
yeah.
I think you're going to get better terms in other areas if you offer that.
Yeah, I think when you're able,
are we, if you're saying like, hey, and I know it's really tough I always try to cram things into a box that shouldn't be crammed into a box. But if you're saying like, hey, I'm going to offer you upfront cash, give me a percentage that you're guessing that they might take off of their offer if you're going to do that.
I think, it definitely spikes the attention when you say, hey, I can write a check in 30 days. We can close this deal, versus paying 30% up front. Then at end of year one, you pay the other, 70% or maybe 50%. I definitely think it gives you room to negotiate when you have the capital to write a check and close quickly. Percentage wise, you might be able to take, if someone wants 1.35x gross revenue and you have, capital to do it all up front, you might be able to take it down to, to just dollar for dollar versus paying that little multiplier.
I think you said something interesting also, and I don't remember how you phrased it, but it sounded like you were saying that you're going to raise some attention or something. And so maybe just that will start the conversation where they put others on the back burner. If there's more than one interested buyer, if you're like, hey, it's my anticipation, my plan to get you paid out and have you sell off into the sunset, then they might be just, willing to listen to what you have to say over the others. And that alone might just kind of boost your cause there.
That's exactly what happened with the deal in Chicago. Where we had a broker involved and they were wanting, 30% up front, and the accounts were going to mature for the next 6 months and they were going to get the other 30%. And then, the back end at the end of the year, I came in immediately and said, well, let's just clean this deal up right now and let's write a check and be done with it. Can we get another 10, 15% off asking price? And we were able to do that because I was in a position to write a check for it. So I like doing it that way. In terms of financing acquisitions, the banks, that I've worked with, if you have collateral, if you own your office building, if you own all your vehicles, you can start by, talking to the bank about using those things as collateral and clean financial reports. And you can get, a loan for 150, 200,000, by having those things. But you definitely need some form of collateral to get that kind of, if you are borrowing the money.
So Chase, you mentioned a couple different financing options when it comes to different scenarios you've been in. Mm-hmm. What are some typical financing options that people who are either selling companies or looking to buy another company could look for? How much upfront is appropriate? And then how long of a term and at how much during that term do you think is beneficial for both parties?
Yeah. So I think 50% down and then 50%, sometimes the sellers are going to be, they have some tax liability. You're writing a check for $250,000. They're going to be taxed a little heavier. You give them $125,000 up front. And then at the end of the year, those accounts, generate the revenue. And then you write them another check for $125,000. That's appealing for both the buyer and the seller because of tax, the tax liability. And that allows the buyer to allow those accounts to produce the revenue that's going to be paying that second installment. So I think looking for something like that, is a smart move by a potential buyer and a seller, really. And I think, if you're working with an owner coming on board and maybe being a route manager or a service manager for a little bit, You've got some opportunities to negotiate, how much, up front, because they're going to be working with you in the company. And so that, you're going to have some trust there that they're going to get their back end, or they're going to get, their installments of payment, that kind of thing. But I think out of the 6 acquisitions I've done, 5 of them have been, we've written a check, the owners have sailed off into the sunset, and we took over as soon as we closed. The one deal that I did in April of this year was about a $250,000 book of business. I gave him a check for a half up front, and he's working for me for 2 years. I've got a contract with him, paying him X amount an hour, guaranteeing him 40 hours a week, different things like that, giving him a company vehicle, PTO, all the things that you would expect somebody that's tenured would want. And then at the end of the year, we're giving them the remainder amount. And that was, like I mentioned, beneficial to him and myself, in terms of coming up with the cash flow. So I think doing something like that it would be a great deal.
So this gentleman who is getting all this kind of standard tenured employee type benefits, and at the end of that term, you're paying him the remaining amount. Is he staying on with the business, or is he planning on transitioning out at that point?
Well, we do have a contract, a 2-year contract, guarantees him all the benefits for 2 years. He's staying on. At the end of 2 years, he'll have the option to maybe stay on. He's a really good technician, and he's servicing all the accounts we purchased. So you talk about 100% retention. And then when he leaves, people are well aware that it's no longer his company, that it's a different name, it's a different, logo on the invoices, whatever it might be. So that's also a very appealing thing to do. And so far that's worked out extremely well for us. We haven't lost any of his accounts, and he's been a really good dude to work with.
And I guess that leads me to my next question about retention. When you're going through this acquisition process, what kind of stipulations do you have as a buyer when it comes to you paying for accounts that cancel between day one and the end of that finance term?
That's a great question. And I've talked to brokers who really, set up, things like that can help the buyer out. With me, I just want the list to be active and up to date. And all the acquisitions we've done, I think the largest one I did was $356,000 book of business, which for me, that was pretty stinking huge to pick up and purchase. But those were active customers, and they were serviced last a month ago. All the data was there, the emails, the phone numbers. I haven't actually done a scenario where there's been some steps. Step 1, we got to get to this point and you'll get your next check. Step 2, you meet X amount of criteria, the accounts percentage stays active, then the next installment is paid. I think that's a little above my my head in terms of brokering a deal. I just like clean deals that can be done quickly with cash, and I think that's appealing to a seller because it can happen quick like that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's funny how there's this, as the deals get bigger and there become more moving parts, it becomes more complicated and it takes longer, obviously. I think all of us are aware of a recent deal that closed. I think I'm at liberty to say that Aruza sold out for the most part. Becky, I'm going to have to get with you on that. Will you mark down? I'm 10 minutes in. I'm going to check with Solomon. He's been posting about it, and then can you clean up this section here? So Aruza recently had what I would consider a fairly large exit. They got a very healthy multiple. Not necessarily going to go into the specifics at this point, and maybe we'll have Solomon on at some point to talk, or Christian or Jordan to talk about it at some point. And I have a little more information about the specifics of the deal just because they're my buddies and we chat about it. But it was so interesting to me. I was talking to Solomon, and just once the deal goes through and the money's there, it's like any other deal, Chase. Like it was this, large deal, and a lot of money moving hands. And, I mean, you're the type of guy that I look at and see you working your way up, right? Just because you've already done 6 deals. And you seem to always be curious, maybe not always out there, spending a lot of time on it, but when I post something or I shoot you a text, you're like, hey, I'd be interested to hearing something about, this potential acquisition. What, when it's early for you and you're just learning about the company, what are the big things you want to know? Location, obviously, size. And then I feel like a third question from you might be something like, what is the multiple that they're looking for?
Yeah, I think, asking the question up front, hey, you're looking to sell your business. They say yes. Then asking, what are you looking to get out of your business right from the start? And that, some of them will come back and say to you, well, I don't know, I haven't done this before. What do you think my business is worth? And that's what I love to hear, because now I can kind of dictate where this is going to go. I can quickly make an offer once I see those financial reports, once I see those active customers, once I determine what, pest control software they're using, those kind of things. If they come out with a ridiculous multiple, then can I justify that? Can we negotiate based on what's there? That kind of thing. But I start with right off the top, what are you looking to get for your business? And that allows it. Some of them know. 2 of the deals we did, the 1.3x, that's what that guy wanted. That's what he thought it was worth. That's what he swore up and down it was going to take. And he had a lot of commercial accounts that were going to generate a good amount of monthly revenue, which is why, I wanted those accounts. I wanted to kind of dominate my market by picking up my competitor, that kind of thing.
I imagine that when you talk to these businesses, not everything lines up exactly the way that you want it to, of course. And so, you do some negotiating based on multiples and dollar amounts. But I also wonder if there are some things, logistically speaking, that you might want them to change or update. Like maybe we'll have Solomon on, we'll talk about this Arusa scenario too. But I imagine that during that acquisition, there were probably things that he was doing preparing his business for this acquisition, right? So it makes me wonder, somebody who's hunting other companies, how often do you come into a scenario where you find a company, they want to sell, you're talking multiples, you go through the logistics of what they're offering, and you say, I'm interested, but I'd like you to change X, Y, and Z first, and then let's talk again in 6 months. Do you ever run into that, Chase?
Yeah, we have ran into that. A lot of it comes down to, how clean is their GMB listing, right? We talked in the first episode, organic. What do they look like online? If that's dialed in, that's awesome. That adds value. If it's not, then maybe they need to clean some of that up. Or how accessible is that for me to clean it up if I were to take that over? Are they doing exterior and interior at every quarterly service? I want to be just doing exterior and interior as needed. That's a big deal, right? Do they have cell phones as the primary phone number for each customer so we can send text messages? That's a big deal. If they don't, maybe they need, there's a lot of legwork, Eric, to answer your question. If you can eliminate some of the legwork, you can either you can negotiate the price down because there's so much extra work that I'll have to do once I get the customer list, or B, I want you to go back and do these 3 things. And once you're done with that, we can talk again about price. And we can see if this is a fit for both of us. But, there's definitely things to look for in terms of how the company that you're looking to acquire, how do they do things, and how does it mesh with your culture and how you do things?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I, like Allan was saying before, these deals, as they get bigger and bigger, sometimes they get a lot more complicated, right?
100%.
And I wonder, do you find yourself in scenarios, despite the size of the deal, where you talked about having these owners that stay on as technicians. Do you ever find yourself in a scenario where you want to buy their business and you actually want them to go? Like, you're like, hey man, thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of look at it that as, they want their cake and they want to eat it too, kind of thing, right? They want to stay on, they want to come in and decide how things are going to go. They want to dictate kind of how the office sets up their routing. I have been in one deal like that, and I walked on it for that reason alone. And I would recommend anybody who runs into a very, I don't know if a strong-willed owner who is kind of stuck in their ways and thinks they know how to do everything and thinks better than you. That's a tough relationship if they come on for a year or two, because they're going to want to keep doing the things the same way that they were doing it before, when you may have a different vision for the company and then the direction of how things are going.
Honestly, like if you put yourself in their shoes, that's not something I can do. I can't allow somebody to take my company and then me work. So I don't know that Proof's ever going to exit. We've never really talked about it seriously, but if we get to that stage in 10, 15, 20 years, I have no idea.
You guys got to be getting 2 to 3 emails a month, one a week.
Yep.
from people. I know I'm getting them.
Yep, we get them quite a bit, but if they're like, yeah, Allan, you have to stay on, I'm like, pass.
100%.
I couldn't do it. I'm an owner, like, and that's how I think. So just from your perspective, Chase, I think that's pretty cool that you're able to work with these guys, but in a way, it's almost like bringing on a partner that doesn't have any like autonomy or authority. So you're bringing on somebody, they're no longer a partner, but they like to think that they are. So I think that would be hard.
I think we had when I did that, the one deal that I've done that, we had a very clean cut contract of what the expectations were, how this is going to play out, what you're going to get compensated for, benefits, all those things. And I think if there's an agreement there and you can kind of get a sense for the character and integrity of that person, it can work out really, really well. And you're going to retain all those customers, because he's going to go out. If he's going to be the tech, he'll keep them all going because those are his clients, and he'll be able to educate them better than anybody would on what's happening. And that can be extremely beneficial for retention.
Chase, I wonder, so Allan had this achievement, and I'm going to give Allan some props here for a second, where he had some phenomenal customer acquisition cost numbers with Proof, which was killer. And for a month, at least, he beat out his cost per lead numbers, which just blows my mind. But, I imagine that not every PCO obviously understands what their cost per acquisition is, or customer acquisition cost. And I would probably bet that what that number is just from the digital side of things, because, it would pay off to understand, okay, I'm going to buy these accounts from this acquisition. Technically, if I just multiply all those accounts, I'm going to know what my customer acquisition cost is per acquisition. Does that really factor in for you? Do you weigh the differences between what your customer acquisition cost is via digital and other types of marketing versus acquisitions when you go hunting in a market?
I mean, no, not really. I look at their, gross revenue. I look at how long they've been in business. I look at the average age of the customer, what percentage is residential, what percentage is commercial, is the book of business all recurring, those kind of things. And I'm also looking at what my personal goals are for myself and my company in terms of revenue. And if I can quickly add $250,000, overnight in a market that I'm already in, gaining another piece of the pie, multiple funnels coming into my corporation through different, Google listings, Yelp listings, phone numbers, I'm going to get there a lot quicker. So I look at, I'm not a super detailed guy, which means, Eric, you and I would probably be really good partners, because you seem extremely detailed, which is fantastic. And I make decisions quickly, right or wrong. And so far it's been working out pretty well for me. But, I try to make those decisions based on what my goals are and what I think we can do post acquisition with our, piece of the market that we're acquiring. and the number of accounts that generate X amount of revenue.
Well, I appreciate where you're coming from too, because I'm the kind of guy, because how detail oriented I can be with certain situations, I might look at the numbers and talk myself out of a deal that will otherwise prevent me from being able to hit those goals that you're talking about. And sometimes it's nice to be able to just separate those two things and not try to compare them, one to the other, and just think, okay, I'm going to go after that. I want to be aggressive. These are my revenue goals. I'm going to add another piece of the pie, right? Without being paralyzed via analysis of trying to compare, customer acquisition costs and all these other facts and figures. So I can respect where you're coming from when it comes to that.
If for me, if my thought process is, it's tough. I think it's a factor. I look at it on like, hey, how much is this costing me? And I think obviously Chase has, said that also. How much are these customers costing me? But then there's this benefit that you get on a couple of different levels. You're absorbing a brand. Like how strong is that brand? What value can I add to their current base or their customer list, their former customers? What value can I add that they weren't executing on? How can I upsell? Can I increase prices? What's the value that I can add to increase whatever I paid for that customer base? Whereas with, a lead gen source, it's like, we're doing that from the beginning. They're already into our system. I'm already doing that cross marketing. So when I'm talking about that, at least that's my perspective. Chase, do you kind of look at it like that? Like, hey, I'm getting some value from absorbing this brand. I'm getting my company's name out there in another way, other referral sources and other connections that I'm not getting from just a one-off customer that Googled me.
I agree 100%. And that makes a ton of sense, Allan, because when you buy a book of business, they might have 400 active customers or 500 or 800. But what if their database might have 16,000 contacts? Yeah. What about the win back campaigns? What about if you're getting 600 quarterlies, none of them have mosquito? How can I get, 30% of those quarterlies on a mosquito subscription? I have the ability to do that very quickly. And I can, take that average customer value and double it very, very quickly. The other thing is in terms of having more market share. If you look at our phones, if every acquisition we do, we port in their phone number. And so our phones, when it's new customer, it might say new customer Wisconsin, new customer Crown Exterminator, new customer Kendrick General Pest. Like, we know where these calls are coming from. And if they say those things, they're coming from those phone numbers, and those phone numbers are from their Google listings. So I have 6 different companies pouring into my company in 3 different states. So, we have so many organic new customer calls just from those listings. It's incredible. I mean, they're coming from all over. So we just, our space of influence is that much greater because we've picked up companies that have been around for 50 years. That phone number's been in people's, contact cards for a very long time. And we want to hold on to that. It's extremely valuable.
Yeah. A lot of times those old phone numbers are very valuable. The old websites, even if they're kind of run down and not super flashy, they can sometimes have some good SEO. So I think that's a great point.
For sure.
Chase, we've talked a little bit about like service related situations that you look for that might be red flags. Like if they're always treating the interior and exterior on every service, like that's a logistical nightmare, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of a 2-part question for you. Are there any other service related red flags that you notice when it comes to acquisitions? And the second part of the question is, what's a service related addition, like the most common thing that you guys start doing for the customers that you acquire that other companies weren't doing before that customers really seem to appreciate?
Yeah, quickly, to answer your second part of that question is adding mosquito control to those active, quarterlies or bi-monthlies or monthlies. And that's been extremely effective. And we typically add between 200-300 mosquito counts a year, all in-house through just cross-selling. So that's an extreme benefit. In terms of issues with acquiring accounts, a lot of the smaller companies, they have their scheduling on fixed days. And for example, first Tuesday of the month, this, commercial account gets completed. That may not line up with our scheduling. So we got to adjust some of those things. I think collecting updated contact persons for each accounts, and I'm mainly talking about commercial accounts here. You have to go through and kind of clean those up, make sure you have, emails on file. Those are the things that can be kind of a nightmare from the, commercial pest control. If their database doesn't have that when it comes in. So those are some things that we have to deal with, but, maybe you show up to a commercial account that doesn't have any rodent bait stations and doesn't have anything out that it should. And you're just shocked that this person still had the account, and you gotta add a little bit more equipment to make sure that's being serviced properly. Those are some things that can flare up, but in general, the customers are very loyal, and they're going to let you come out and do your thing, and I think another thing, Eric, has just popped in my head was the pricing too. Some of these commercial accounts, if you're not digging through every one and spending hours going through them, you might miss that some of them are very underpriced, and you're like, holy smokes, how are these guys doing it for that little amount of money? But most of them are aware that they've had a good price for a long time, and a price increase, that they understand that. And that would be that one of the things that I just thought of.
Speaking of price, I've talked to lots of PCOs, and I think Allan might share the same thing, that a lot of these guys don't raise their prices, or they're not great.
Ever.
Yeah, they're not great at increasing their prices, whether they feel like they're against it morally, or they're just worried that there's going to be a lot of customer fall off or whatever. Do you ever find yourself in a scenario where you look over a customer list and you get to a certain point where you're like, hey, I'm not going to pay for these. Like, maybe if we can call them and get them to like an actual price that makes sense, I'll pay for those. But otherwise, I'm not going to add these into the deal. Do you ever run into that?
Well, the only thing I can think of that was close to that is we did a deal back in, I think 2019. It was the first deal I had. They had 80, I think it was 90 Shell gas stations, and they were all like about $40 a month. So I mean, that's it's a good little cash flow, recurring revenue account. And I was concerned that they would cancel the second they heard there was a transition in ownership and the acquisition happened. And so I was able to factor those out of the deal. So that 1.3 multiplier wasn't, I mean, what is that? A $50,000 annual account in those gas stations roughly. So that 50 grand came out of the top line revenue. And I didn't have to include that in any kind of multiplier, or, we really didn't pay for those counts. And now, just like I suspected, we did them for about 3 months. And then when they found out that, there was an acquisition, they canceled our service and they went with somebody else. There was some bad blood there. And we kind of was hoping that it didn't come up, but it did. But, I was able to protect myself from that, that loss.
How often do you find yourself in situations like that where you kind of pick and choose stuff that you factor out of the deal? Is it pretty often, or is it far and few between?
I think it's far and few between. The more you know your competitor, the more you're going to get, that kind of thing. If there's a broker involved, you can work those things out fairly quickly because you can, go through the list with some support. I think it's important if you're going to do an acquisition. All of us should look in our markets, like who else is doing pest control next to us. When you Google your company in the service area, who's there, paying attention to those things gives you an idea of who your competitors are, and seeing their trucks out and how often they're in your space to determine whether or not it would make sense for you to possibly purchase them, and then keep their brand online organically. So you're monopolizing your market. They call your competitor, they get you, they call you, you're in the top 2 of the top 3 companies, or your company's on Google. So, looking for those things, in terms of like taking things out of the deal, it can happen. And I think everything is negotiable, but to me, it's not a ton. I'm again, top line revenue, active accounts, recurring revenue, my goals. That's what I'm looking at quickly, and how quickly can I get the money to do it? Can I afford to do this deal?
So we've covered quite a bit, and, over the two parts to this topic, I wanted to wrap up if we could kind of get our three heads together, and I'm going to take some notes as we're doing this. I say all the time, I've said it more times than I've needed to, that the best way to build a pest control company to sell is to build it not to sell. And what I mean by that is you build it so that it's sustainable, so that you're making money, your people are happy, your customers are happy. And by doing that, it's going to be worth more. I say that all the time. Eric asked a great question about, what are the things, if you go into a deal, will you ask people to change? And so that made me think, if the three of us could kind of put our heads together and let's list the top 10 things that, if they're in place, will increase in our minds, our collective minds, the value that a company will get upon an exit or a sell. We've mentioned quite a few, and we don't necessarily need to put them in order, but I'll kick it off with one, high contract values. We were talking about pricing.
Oh yeah.
What about if I ran into some older gentlemen that are wanting to get out, that they have all paper invoices? What about if they have a streamlined software system that makes that transfer easy? Is that factored in there? Do you guys think? Is that on the top 10?
It's got to be in there somewhere. Right?
Absolutely. I think it is. Makes things a lot easier. You can pick up right where the previous owner left off, because all your data and history is now in your CRM, versus starting a new customer from scratch because you had to manually put it in. Service instructions. What are you doing at at a commercial account? Some of that requires a little more information than just showing up and, and spraying. So having that is huge, I think.
Speaking of contract value, one of the things that pops in my head is that it's not just that it's a high contract value, but that it's appropriate for your market. We get these door teams, and there's some marketing companies that come in, they'll sell in a market and they hit some huge contract values because for them, they make commissions on those contract values. And
right.
Good, right.
Yeah.
But then they leave the actual PCO in a scenario where in his market, those could be very, very high attrition accounts for the next season, right? Because they're paying so much. So if the contract value is appropriate, and I guess you could look at the attrition, right? We talked about attrition before.
Okay. I think that's got to be on that list.
Right. Got to be on the list, year over year attrition. And is that related to, bad customer service, bad routing, technician issues, or, inappropriate pricing? Another thing for me is, am I just buying an operation of pest control accounts, or am I buying the growth model that they have in place already and their operation? So I want to look at their year over year growth numbers. In fact, I want to look at their growth from the previous probably 2 or 3 years and see how that's trending, because that'll tell me about the health of their GMB. That'll tell me about the health of campaigns that they run, how well their market associates with them being a major player in the area. So for me, I would look at year over year growth for sure.
I like that. So we've added attrition numbers, like, hey, are they, retaining a lot of their company, a lot of their customer base? Are they growing? One thing that Jared mentioned, Jared Board during his episode, which if you haven't listened to, make sure to go back and listen to that. We'll include that episode number in the show notes. But he mentioned not just customer retention, but also employee retention.
Oh yeah.
I mean, go ahead, Eric.
Well, I was going to say, if you're in the position where you're going to, assimilate, you're going to buy these accounts and you're already operating in that area, you're in a place where you have a competitor, maybe you buy the accounts and your existing operation can handle just doing it. You don't necessarily need it. Maybe you get a couple of technicians and that's fine. But obviously you want to retain those technicians, those licensed guys who already know those customers, right? But even more so, like if you go outside your service area and you do an acquisition, you know, the operations manager, maybe a service manager, office manager, whoever's running that operation in that other state, you really want to make sure that those people are happy, not just with the transition, but by the time you get the company, it's not like they're already disgruntled, right? So I might look at that company's employee retention over the last how long and say, you know, how do people like working here? You know, how have you done with the relationships with those employees up to this point? Because I might not be able to fix all the problems that you put in place, right? But if you do have good relationships, I probably could maintain those good relationships if I'm a good manager, owner, operator.
I think that sometimes it's hard to survey or determine customer satisfaction. A lot of times we know when they're not satisfied because they'll let us know. But when they are, sometimes you don't hear from them very much. And I think one of the best ways, one of the best barometers for how satisfied your customers are is a much more easily measurable metric. And that is how happy are my employees, i.e., how much am I retaining them? So I think it's two parts. I think it's this part of that being an actual asset during the acquisition. And then I also think there's this added part of it measures how happy your customers are if you're able to keep your people.
Yep. And I think Eric, and to his point, those things are definitely more geared towards medium size acquisitions. When you talk about culture of the company, you know, employee retention, things like that are all huge points. I think for me, recurring revenue, route density, average age of the account, and longevity in the market. You know, how many techs are you going to get with your deal, right? You know, are they certified, like you mentioned, Eric? Are they licensed and all that? Is what the quick things that I try to look at, you know, in terms of whether could even be a possibility to start talking about it, right?
I think that, you know, you mentioned longevity in the market, I think, and I don't know if this would fall under that same category, but, you know, the brand of the company, is it well-known? And more specifically, what do their online reviews look like?
Yes. Yeah. If I've got a company that has 0 reviews or a little bit of reviews, you know, or bad rating, or if they even have like 500 and some reviews, but it's a bad rating, you know, I mean, that all goes into that GMB profile. It might be kind of tough to recover that. And if you're planning on that asset, including having that brand where you're putting in the number and letting that GMB profile continue on, that plays a role, right? So I was going to ask you guys, do you think that source of those customers matters? You know, 100%. referral based digital marketing, or, you know, door to door. I mean, do you factor that into the deal because you know that those types of sources are going to be better or worse attrition wise?
I do. Door to door. I bought one company that was solely door to door. Those customers fell off so much quicker than the ones that have been around, you know, for 40, 50 years. The average customer is 6, 7 years old. So I think the source is a big deal, particularly with door to door. You know, it's harder to hold on to those after 2 years, 3 years. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means it's a lot harder than somebody who you've had for 8 to 10, 12 years.
Yep. A lot of work, a lot of touch points that would need to go into that. And I think that goes back to the longevity that Chase was talking about. So if you're getting customers through door to door, it means you're growing at a very fast rate in most cases, which means your relative average customer base is young. So I think that's a great point. And you mentioned when you asked the question, Eric, about referrals, you know, you want to know something interesting that I've noticed? For people that refer Proof Pest Control, and I need to say this clearly so it makes sense, because it gets a little confusing. The people that are actually referred stay with Proof longer than the person that actually referred them to Proof.
Oh, interesting.
So to me, that is the highest form of a customer, is somebody that was referred to us. Now, if you have a customer that's referring people to Proof to your company, that's also a really, really good customer, because what they're saying is, hey, I'm going to stick my neck out on the line for you. And Proof's in the process of going through this revamped referral program. We're really going to double down on it. And it's tough because it's a longer play. It's not immediate ROI. You invest a lot up front, but kind of the long answer is, I think that's a great thing to look at, Eric. Traditionally, door-to-door companies are kind of frowned upon, or they don't get some of the valuations. Although recently we've heard of some I can think of 2 great valuations that people built their PCCs with door-to-door. So I'm going to recap as we're wrapping up here. And Chase, he rattled off like 3 or 4. So I think I missed 1 or 2 in there, and it doesn't have to be exactly 10, but I've got 9. A high contract value, but Eric, I think appropriately, clarified that it needs to be commensurate with the market. Software system, or kind of the ease of the transition, low attrition. What's their growth rate? So if they're a growing company year over year, then it's going to be worth more. Your employee retention. So if you're keeping your people, it's going to be worth more. A high percentage of recurring revenue. Chase mentioned the split between residential and commercial. The longevity in the market. How long has that company been around? Are they, this fly-by-night company that had hired a marketing team year 1 and they're trying to sell year 2? Number, I think this is either 8 or 9. Brand/online reviews / their Google My Business profile. And then number 10, the source of customers. Where are they getting their customers? How have they invested into marketing and things like that? That's one heck of a list.
I got to throw one more in there just because I like it. I really do. And the longer we've done it, the more I like the monthly billing model.
Yes,
man, disconnecting the way that you bill customers from how you service customers has a lot of flexibility too. We've done other episodes on this. If a company had that, I would be much more attracted to it.
It's funny because this list is gonna grow, but subscription model for me fits in the top 5.
Yeah, man, it's a big one for me. I'm surprised I forgot to bring it up sooner.
Yeah. So, well, I think that gives people a lot of things to work with. And here's the thing, is that this is applicable, like I said before, not just for folks looking to exit, because you're doing the same things that you'd be doing if you're just trying to build a successful, profitable, growing pest control company. You're focused on those things.
Exactly.
So whoever's listening, do those things, right? It's really easy. I'm just kidding. It's all the hard stuff. Right? It's all the hard stuff, but that's why there's so much value in it. So,
yep.
Yeah. So we've gone a little long, but I think we really added some value here. Chase, you're the man. It's cool because I've known you for several years now, and I've just seen the growth that you've had just by doing it. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've got your face kicked in a couple of times on some of these acquisitions with one thing or another, like, hey, I overpaid, or I didn't do this correct when we were transitioning our customers, or whatever it is. But you've just done it. You just do it and learn from it. And I think that's a great model to follow. Just kind of figure it out.
I think you can't be afraid to overpay a little bit. I mean, if you really want the market share, you want that revenue to grow, you want it to help you get to your goals quicker. dive all in and get after it. There's gonna be a lot more good that comes out of it than not. So I think, thank you for saying that, but that's absolutely how I think of acquisitions and doing things.
Very cool. Well, this was awesome, Chase. I'm sure you'll be back. There will be people that have questions. Where can they reach you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on Facebook. Obviously, I'm a part of the Bug Bucks group, which a lot of people are reaching out to me right now on that. They can give me a call at any time. I'm willing to share any of the nuggets that I've had, and we'll be glad to do that.
Awesome. Love it. This was a fantastic episode. Thanks for joining us.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please show your support by subscribing and leaving us a 5-star rating. Thank you, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.